Hello and welcome to episode 9 of Subplot, of course, a podcast discussing a new science fiction literary work every month by casual fans just like you. I'm Stavros, and with me is someone who has managed to not be torn apart by any of the vicious young people he is responsible for teaching, Charlie. Say hi, Charlie.
Hello.
Also with me is Vincent, who actually considered murdering everyone over the age of 21 for science. Say hi, Vincent.
Very, very false.
Sure.
Hi, I'll say hi. I'll respond to that bit, but the rest of it completely untrue. Okay.
We'll see. And finally, we're also...
That's what your lawyers tell you to say.
Yeah, that's true. Don't want to have that on the record. And finally, we're also joined by John, who is yet to engineer anything nearly as cool as the Homer bullet. Say hi, John.
This is John. That's accurate.
Yeah. All right, today we're going to be talking about Logan's Run, written by two authors, William F. Nolan and George Clayton Johnson, and published in 1967. And of course, as usual, you should be prepared to hear some spoilers. So to review the plot synopsis of this book, it's in the not-so-distant future, and new laws have been established that say you cannot live over the age of 21. The titular character, Logan, is a sandman, a sort of cop who is in charge of the enforcement of that 21-year age limit, at least until his own time is just about up. He teams up with Jessica Six, whose brother was killed trying to escape, and the two proceed through a series of adventures on the way towards Sanctuary, a fabled location where people can go once their time has expired. So, let's jump right into some topics here. And the first one, which we talked a little bit, in pre-production, was the sort of serialized adventuring style that this book takes. We kind of thought it was similar to John Carter, a previous book that we read on this. So by serialized, I mean there's a kind of the intro to the book where Logan is hunting down people that are trying to evade the law, and there's a lot of world building there. And then finally he meets up with his partner Jessica, and they kind of go on this off the rails adventure across the planet, trying to get to Sanctuary. So let me first tell you guys my thoughts on this, because I know some of you guys really liked it. I'm going to compare this, the format of this book, and it's Christmas season as we're recording this episode. I'm comparing this to the Nutcracker. And so how I'm doing this, so in the Nutcracker, you guys recall part 1. It's really awesome. There's, the girl with the Nutcracker, and she gets shrunk, and she joins the soldiers, and they have, like, the kind of fight with the, rat people.
You forgot, like, the first 2/3 of that first half, which are just dinner party with children.
That's true. That's what I mean by world building. So that's part 1. The soldiers fight the rat people. There's this battle. It's really awesome. Then there's this kind of conclusion. They won. Hooray. Part 2 is a little bit less cohesive of the Nutcracker. So they kind of just go to these places and people are dancing. You're just kind of like, what's happening? And then she wakes up at the end.
That's kind of like that celebration thing where all the people come and are like, yay, the Nutcracker guy is back, and then they all celebrate, all these people from across the world or something. This isn't about the Nutcracker anyway.
Nothing about what you said makes part 2 of the Nutcracker any better. Anyway.
Does it need to be any better stuff? Anyways.
I think it does. So I'm saying that this book is a lot like that. Like the first part of the book, there's a lot of world building. You can see what he's doing. He's chasing people and stuff. And then finally he gets together with Jessica Six, and he's going across the world trying to find the way to Sanctuary. And he's just hitting up all of these random locations, none of which have any connection with one another, I felt. At least until the very end where they finally do escape to space.
So Stavros, I have to say that I agree with the idea that you feel that the book is fractured, but I have a different theory.
Yeah,
this is the first book that we have read which has had 2 authors. When you think about it that way, it makes complete sense. 2 guys wrote the book. That means you've got 2 guys writing different chunks of the book, in my mind. Or maybe one guy wrote it, another guy proofread, but it really reads like you have one guy writing a chunk, another guy writing the chunk, and they're like, copy and paste it together, and we have a total novel. Only, I would take it a step further. I would say, one guy was the kind of perverted guy, and he wrote all the sex scenes, and then the other guy was in charge of the sci-fi stuff. Because it just felt like everything was just matching. It's like, oh, well, let's just throw in random sex scenes into the book and make it really racy. And the other guy's like, well, no, let's talk about robots and about like, in the future and dystopia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That was my take on the book. Was just like, two guys writing a book doesn't usually mean that you get a cohesive book in the end.
Side note to the lawyers of William Nolan or George Clayton Johnson, neither of those are based on fact. We are not accusing either of the writers of said distribution of work.
Vince is merely expressing how he feels like it might have felt it would have been written, given the end result.
If Stavros and I had teamed together to write a book,
it would be nothing like this.
I think we know which half of it Vincent would write. So
obviously, the very intellectual, knowledgeable, wonderful, calm, scientific part, and Stavros would be writing. Oh, the other author wants to kill everyone over the age of 21. By the way.
All right, so I'm going to call out Charlie just because you said you really liked the serialization. So tell me why. Why you're wrong.
It's funny because it's like, the serialization. I said I really liked the book. Some of the blatant serialization is some of the weakest part of the book. But what I liked was how they'd get to a place and then they'd give you, like, some of the places they gave you this nice little intro, like, as to, like, what happened. It's like, oh, we built up this, like, underwater city, and it was great, and all these people moved there, and it briefly solved some of the population food problems. They had this thing, and then it's like, and then it didn't work. And so it's like throughout the book, you're getting kind of this world building stuff. And I like that part of it, where it's kind of like, okay, here's something that fits into the world. Here's kind of their brief little adventure into the, like, post now this place is crap part of the book. And then they get back in the maze and they end up in a new place where it kind of then builds up the story some more. And they kind of try to tie it all together where it's like, oh, obviously the guy leading them to Sanctuary has put all these places that are kind of run down and not really part of the system anymore on the track. But yeah, I mean, it's obviously an excuse to be like, run around and do the things. But I like it better than, I think I've complained before where it's just like giant 50-page, like, and this is why the world now sucks dump at the start. It's like, no, they spread it throughout the book. They gave you, like, some more hints or some more things that were appropriate to whatever location they were just about to visit. So you get some of the world as well as an intro to, like, here's kind of what they're going to face now that they're at this place.
Okay, fair enough. John, what did you think?
I'm going to take...
Whose side are you on here?
I'm going to take the counterpoint to the counterpoint. I'm going to say, I'm with you, Stavros. I thought the serialization was really chunky to read. I felt like once the first half of the book was complete, actually much before the first half, that's generous. I would have said the first quarter of the book was complete. The rest of the side stories and places they visited, I did not feel like they sufficiently moved forward the story or the characters. I mean, they were excursions that didn't have a lot of cohesiveness to the whole story. Other than just building this world, I felt like there was other ways they could show it. It was a little bit boring to read.
Fair enough. All that Civil War reenactment at the end there. What's going on? Anyway, let's move on.
Like, it's blatant propaganda to be like, look at all these people who died in war for their country. They're brave, just like you will die for your country. I mean, that was pretty blatant what they were doing.
All right, so let's jump to another topic. Obviously in this book, the whole reason why they, are having people expire at the age of 21 is to do population control. And I think we've kind of hit on some of this in some of the other books, kind of indirectly. I think this is the first time we've read one where they're straight up, we're on Earth, there was overpopulation, this is how they handled it. But it is kind of a, like a common 70s trope. How do you guys feel about that?
I mean, our very first book, Forever War, had that as a blatant plot point of, like, look at food type shortages with overpopulation. I'm pretty sure a couple of the other ones we've read have had similar type things.
Sure. But how did this book do in terms of handling that?
I can give you a perspective of someone who has a little bit of biology background. I get the feeling that neither author was really someone who really looked at world demographics very carefully. The first line of the book, like the first description of the book, is like, in the 80s, the percent of people under the age of 21 was 79.7%. To give you perspective, Currently, the world population's like less than 40%. So he's already doubling the number of people under the age of 21. By the 1990s, he says it's up to 82%, and by 2000, it's quote unquote critical mass. It's like unless the entire world, like the Little Wars, like the potential explanation is that Little Wars killed everyone over the age of 21. Either because everyone over the age of 21 hit the draft age and they all went and fought and they all died. In which case, maybe you hit that kind of 80% level, but you don't have any of the problems of overpopulation because you would have so much fewer people.
Like towards the end of the book, they explain it all, where they put on the like overpopulation control type stuff, and the young people revolted, and then the guy who was president volunteered.
Yeah, but keep in mind that there's nobody in the book who is actually a parent.
Well, yeah.
Nobody raises their own children. They actually raise their children in robotic nurseries. So then it brings the question, why is there overpopulation? Because obviously there are no parents who care about raising their own kids. They raise them through a proxy. Then why doesn't the proxy just limit the number of people being born, in which case then you don't have an overpopulation problem?
Well,
so there's these, right? I mean,
in the book it says that like all of that was like an issue 100 years ago. They're so far removed from all that the world is now this kind of weird nightmare version of like what has happened now that nobody has this type of responsibility and stuff that's led to this situation where now everyone's getting killed off at 21.
Sure, but the issue then becomes you've probably solved the issue of overpopulation within a few decades. Case in point, China. So China has had a huge overpopulation problem. They went to a one-child policy, which some might argue it's a form of population control. Their population has dropped off relatively precipitously. India is now the number one in the world, and China is now facing a reverse problem where they have too many males, not enough females, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they have basically gotten to the point where they're not as worried about overpopulation as they were before. In this world, they have 100 years of time, in which case they got rid of everyone who was old, they started killing everyone over the age of 21, and they have machines controlling how many kids are being put out. I would argue that within a decade at tops, if they kept killing off people that aggressively and control the population that to the degree that they seem to indicate they are in the book, they would not have an overpopulation problem anymore. So it's kind of an idea of like they are setting up the world where it's a very interesting world. Doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of like how they framed it, but I am willing to suspend my disbelief and go along with it. But this is definitely one of the worst implementations of a kind of a setting for a book that we've read out of the past books that we've kind of had to deal with.
Is it mostly? I mean, at that point, if they could control the population via the mechanisms they put in place, at some point it might just become, I don't know, a social choice.
Well, that's yes. What I was thinking. It's more like the system's in place, and now you just do it because it's the system, not because it's really necessary anymore or anything like that.
Yeah, but then that would indicate that there's not enough strong leadership to be able to stand out and say, hey, by the way, the whole reason why we did this under the age of 21 thing, that whole issue is gone now. We don't have overpopulation where people we can ramp it up to 25 or maybe to 30 because we don't have anyone over the age of an undergraduate. Like nobody's graduated from college in this book. If they died by 21, they're all in undergrad and then they died. So like, how do you create more science? How do you help society?
That's like the whole issue, and they're showing you how like the world is decaying and the system's falling apart because it's all these people who are way too young and giving into the system, and there's no like real work they have to do, and they can just go travel and then work some sad 9-hour-a-week job once they have to work. And
so let's hang on the technology topic because that is the very next one. But
okay.
So I think we're talking about population. Like we've kind of established that this is maybe not like the most realistic way of handling that. But I mean, do we all agree that even though the setup is kind of awkward, at least builds some interesting scenario for the book to handle?
Well, yeah, it's written in the 70s, which I think is the whole point. Is like, what actually happened was none of that. Because I remember in the book at one point they're like, the population got to 6 billion, and it's like, yeah,
we're at 7 billion
there right now.
And so. Yeah, it's clearly that's the thing. It's this all these books with these huge like lack of food overpopulation problems are clearly a product of their time.
Yep, that's true. All right, so let's move on to the actual the technology and its role in this book. So we've kind of touched on that a little bit. These people aren't college aged, and a lot of this tech in this novel has kind of been degrading, and people have kind of abdicated their responsibility to the machines. Why don't you expand on that? I think, Charlie, you were talking about that a little bit. Do you want to expand on that?
I mean, it's kind of what I was talking about before, where it's like, yeah, the serialization's kind of lame if you're not into the whole thing. But it's like, they always bring up, like, this is what this was, this is why it's not really working anymore. Like, even when they go to the place where the giant AI is set up, it's like, entire parts of the AI just, like, aren't on anymore. And it's like, you just get a sense that, yeah, there's the system everyone's bought into, and it's kind of like, it's almost a moral responsibility to keep doing it, but at the same time, the system doesn't work, and it's slowly just kind of decaying.
Yep, that's true. And, of course, and on top of that, we've also got all kinds of crazy tech in this novel that does work right. So, as far as the, people taking rockets to Mars and the plot relevant 6-shooters where you can only shoot people
you can just get things like that. Instant surgery that turns you into other people.
Yeah, some of the tech is pretty advanced. I have to say though, back to your point, Charlie, I have to say that I think it's not that people kind of acquiesce to this is the system. Like, I didn't see a lot of agency for most of the people in terms of how the system actually works and how it should be maintained. I'm not sure that if there were people who were like, I think we'd like to change the system, I'm not sure they would know how to do that.
Well,
or even how to maintain the system.
Kind of the issue we're saying, where it's like everyone gets killed by 21, so who would even be around long enough to mature into an appropriate position where they could actually do anything and not have a bunch of 14-year-olds be like, no, you gotta die at 21, don't be such a jerk.
Sounds about right. Some of the tech is pretty advanced, like that the machine you'd mentioned, the medical alteration machine that can essentially change your metabology on the table. To some extent, the tech didn't need to be. This is kind of like a sci-fi light kind of book, in my opinion. It's not really about. It's not really about showing off an understanding of where technology might be going and showing some interesting ways that it might interact with society. Yeah. This was more about like I've got a. I kind of see this book as an allegory about sort of the ultra devotion to youth and the opinion of 1968 and how things were changing, and maybe there's sort of there's some respect for the old guard maybe in the book is what he was getting across, but mostly the technology was about getting that point across. 6-shooters were probably 6-shooters are necessary as a plot point, but they actually it's pretty critical to the plot of the book as he goes through it.
I think the 6-shooter, it adds to like the serialness of it, where it's like he has 6 bullets and they each do a thing. It made it feel very much like an action movie where it's like he has this list of things he can do once to get out of situations.
Yes,
that's a good point. My analogy was more that it was a Dungeons and Dragons sessions where he was role playing a wizard who only had 6 spells, and he had no time to rest and learn any new spells. It's like you only got 6, and they all do different things because you didn't know what you wanted when you first walked into the venture. But now you gotta live with it.
That is a good point. We're talking a little bit about youth empowerment, and I had that as a separate topic here, where this book is basically like in the 60s there's a lot of civil rights movements and that kind of thing, and it's basically like college age, powered by college age students for the most part. And this book kind of says like, hey man, you remember the 60s? Like, what if like youth empowerment was turned up to 11, and let's like make that the topic of the book?
Like if instead of like the draft being the thing, it was like population control, and it's like, you know what, we could just have all the young people we wanted if people killed themselves when they got to 21. Let's just do that.
Stop, you thought the book was Nutcracker. I basically think that the book is Lord of the Flies, only with high-tech stuff.
I have that analogy too, actually.
A lot of young kids who have no adult supervision, they take over the world, they do things the way they want to do, and everything goes to bullcrap, basically.
Yeah, I like that analogy too. I feel like that makes a lot of sense.
Except it's like just sadder.
I mean, the funny thing is that Lord of the Flies was written right around the time as Logan's Run was written. So it might have been just a period thing where it's like, hey, what if young kids were put in charge? How much trouble would they end up being in? Lord of the Flies like, oh god, that'd be the worst thing ever. And the Logan's Run is like, also the worst thing ever.
I mean, talking about youth in this book, I mean, we talked a little bit in pre-production about the Cubs, and it's basically just clumps of tiny people that horribly murder anyone they come across. So,
tiny children.
Yeah.
With like super soldier drugs.
And they're basically, I feel like I feel like it might be even be a little bit of a reaction against the civil rights thing, where it's like, man, this youth powered social movement kind of sucks.
Yeah, that's how I read it. I read it as sort of a counterpoint to giving excessive amounts of opinion or say to young people.
All right, so let's go on to the ending. So, you guys might recall that in the ending, they confront the oldest man in the world, and they basically just pile into a rocket ship and go to Mars. And personally, it provides finality to the story. I kind of felt like, I was kind of hoping for some kind of larger, maybe there was like a revolt against this movement or something, or just some more, closure to the plot. But instead, nope, they just leave.
No, I don't know why. I'm always that person who's like happier when sci-fi stuff ends with like the personal escape. Like, there's things like Star Wars where it's like the whole point is that giant whatever, but it's kind of like I'm perfectly happy with like a Terminator where it's kind of like it's the goals get away from the one thing and then after that they do and it's fine.
Okay, so you think they're just running out, leaving the planet totally fine as an ending?
Yeah, I think that's probably why I'm fine with the whole serialization thing. Like, I like the idea of there's this world everyone's bought into, and the individual decides to make a break for it, and you get to see whether or not they can, or if the world catches up with them.
Okay, fair enough. Vincent, what did you think of the ending?
I was personally extremely happy about the way the book ended. Reason being that if they actually tried to stay around and fix the entire situation, that book would have been 3 times as long, and I don't think I would have had the patience to finish it.
Okay.
So the fact that they were like, this is not going anywhere fast. Let's jump on the rocket and end the book. I was like, I'm right there with you, buddy. Put me on that rocket.
Yeah. So I guess I'm the type of person where it's like, it's kind of like the first Hunger Games I'm perfectly happy with, where it's like, okay, she does the tournament thing. It sucks. Like, there's bigger issues with society, but that's not what the story's about. And then the later ones, I just roll my eyes at as like largely as I can, and I just don't care and can't stand them.
Yeah, you're waiting for the rocket. Come take Katniss straight to Mars.
I'm just like, she survived, she got out of it, she has to fake putting up with this life for the rest of her life, and like that is a perfectly fine ending for that world and stuff to me.
Fair enough. John, what'd you think?
I thought the ending was... I think they were trying to say something with the ending. In the end, the young people who got away, rather than stay behind and attempt to fix the system, which there was somebody who was willing to try to do that, albeit that person was actually an old person. It was basically, I thought that the authors were trying to say that once youth were able to get their ideas and things didn't turn out the way they wanted them to, that they wouldn't actually stick behind and try to fix it, that they would essentially not take responsibility. They would just leave. And so I thought that was really telling to me that the one young person who actually may stay to become old stayed to try to fix the system, but everybody who was youth would leave. That's how I read it. Interesting
enough, yeah. Well, with that, let's move on to our final thoughts. I will go first. Like I said in my Nutcracker analogy, I really liked the world building and the kind of the way that the book started off. The kind of scene ADD that seems to happen in the second half, I wasn't really that big of a fan of, but I really liked I really liked the characters and for the most part the plot and that kind of thing. So kind of a mixed bag for me as far as would I recommend this book to someone. It's kind of I guess it's kind of a science fiction classic, especially for those world building type elements to the book. But the way it just jumped around, I just wasn't a huge fan of. So, Charlie, what did you think?
I think in terms of the details, essentially the same thing. Like some of the places they go, it feels kind of like it's not like the most original. All these like little individual things they can do. Like, I think around the point where they get captured by the guy in the ice cave who kidnaps them, I was just like, okay, let's go to the next one. I don't know. But overall, it's just like,
for me.
I like the pacing. I like the setup. I thought that the kind of overall world and the metaphor it's trying to make was interesting enough and effective enough that it got me into it. And I ended up enjoying it a lot. So,
Vincent, what were your thoughts?
I think I have three major thoughts, and that kind of goes with how I evaluate books in general. So, plot. Not really a big fan of the plot. We've read a bunch of dystopia type novels already in the past, and that might feel why I'm kind of dissatisfied with this plot. Not really a big fan of how they developed it, and how the pacing kind of went. Writing style, also not a big fan of like how it was written. I don't think it was written in a particularly very inspiring way. Sometimes you read a book and you're like, wow, that person has a way with words. This was definitely written kind of like a fan fiction.
oh yeah, the writing itself was not as good. I think probably
Yeah.
out of all the ones we've read, this felt
The most fanficky, the least professional.
yeah.
But the final reason why I read sci-fi, and probably the most important reason why I read sci-fi, is for creativity. You're looking for a world, a kind of a new way of looking at things, which is completely different from anyone else. It makes you really think because of it. And I would actually give this book an A in terms of creativity. There's a lot of like tech and a lot of kind of like really weird scenarios where you're like, maybe they were on drugs when they thought of it, but like it is so different from many other books. And I'm just like, you know what? It was worth my time in that I didn't read the exact same book a second time. Like they didn't just steal a bunch of ideas from another book, and I'm just like, well, I just wasted my time because I just basically could have gotten the same thing from another book, only written better with a better plot. This one was at least different enough that I gave it an A in terms of creativity. So all in all, it was not a waste of my time, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to anyone else.
John, how about you?
Can't recommend it. Can't recommend it. I mean, the plot that they're trying to make, I thought could have been completed in about a quarter of the number of pages. I just didn't. It wasn't believable enough to me. Out of a sci-fi book, it wasn't interesting enough, and also just like we've been reading some classic books. This one's dated, 1968, I think.
67, yeah.
67. I just thought like the graphic nature of how women are treated in the book is just like it shook me up. So I would, for the faint of heart, to read this book, because you really got to have you really have to have a good historical perspective, because it's hard to read.
Either that, or you have to have a podcast, to force you to finish that book.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, I know. Good point. Yeah, I know. There's a lot of stuff going on in this book that we just didn't have time to touch on, but there are some kind of very graphic sexual elements to this novel too, so I can understand that. Okay, so with that, that's about all the time we have for episode 9. And of course, if anyone has any feedback or suggestions on books we should read and discuss, you can reach us at subplotofcoursepodcast@gmail.com or on Twitter at subplotpodcast. And for next month's episode, we're going to be talking about Starship Troopers by Robert A. Heinlein, and published in 1959, another mid-20th century novel selection for us.
Yay.
Say goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
See ya!
Peace. Space.